I think we're live here.
Recording in progress.
Excellent. Well, good Friday morning, and we've got another exciting episode of Account-Based Fridays. Megan and I have been doing this for, I don't know, about a year plus now, it seems. We've got another great guest today, Christine from Path Factory. We'll give her a proper introduction in a moment. Each week, we start off with a poll, and this week's poll, we talk about the quality of the marketing qualified account. And while there are not a ton of votes here, it is kind of directional in terms of content of how is your marketing qualified account. Is it really well qualified? Is it somewhat qualified? Are you frustrated with the qualification? And I thought what was interesting in this poll, and I'm going to scroll down to the comments. I thought Lanice said it really well down here. And she talked about the process of the quality of the MQA. So while my poll was very oriented toward the outcome of the MQA, I thought she brought up a great point about the process of getting to the quality of the MQA and the process of training and retraining, which a lot of times people forget about, that it is a process. But I don't know, Megan, did you have any reactions to this week's poll?
I think that it's sort of the same old, garbage in, garbage out problem that I think you see in a lot of different marketing programs. And this is no different. If you start out with a list of target accounts that isn't a great match for what should be your ideal customer profile, if you don't have agreement on what target accounts should be, then when you qualify an account that hasn't been properly vetted, or maybe wasn't the right choice in the first place, or if you've cast too wide a net in terms of the accounts that you want to engage, or not wide enough a net in terms of the accounts you want to engage, you're going to see this, right? So I think Lenice's point is very well taken. If you have a smart account strategy that is rooted in the reality of who you should be selling to, and who you can best bring impact to, then you're going to have well-qualified accounts because you started with an appropriate list. If you haven't thought through that piece of it, it's not going to be much better than traditional demand. Just as Lenny said, spray and pray. But that's, but I am curious to get our esteemed guests' feedback on this. Christine Polewarczyk, so happy to have you here today. Christine was my longtime colleague at Serious Decisions, where she basically wrote the book on how to think about B2B content strategy and execution, and was, always a fan favorite analyst for good reason, because she did amazing work. And now at Path Factory, as their SVP of Product Marketing and Strategy, you've got, I think, a really nice opportunity to bring some of that amazing thinking to life for our clients. But I'm just excited for you to share a little bit about your role, and what do you think of our poll?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. It's so good to see you again, and John, be here with you as well. Thanks everyone who's watching and listening. So I made the leap from analyst over to marketing practitioner leader role again. I'm excited to be at Path Factory and sort of trying to bring to life the continue, because I already think the product is strong in this area, but this idea of right audience, right content, right place, right time. We've been talking about it for years. We actually don't do it very well as marketers or revenue engine functions overall. On the poll, I think what you said is interesting, Megan, and super valid. I would add to that, when you think about marketing automation platforms and the way that they score, it's about the completion of certain tasks and conversions, right? So I converted on this number of assets, and that threw me over a threshold, passes over, qualifies as MQL. But what we're missing from that equation is what they're actually doing. So what is the aboutness of that content? How long did they spend on that content? Was there more than one member in that account, contact in that account, known or unknown, who was engaging with that type of content? And you can start triangulating around a buying group or buying committee that's showing real intent. So I think that we have to kind of, map doesn't go away, and we still need to do lead scoring. I think we need to enrich that map data with content data, with first party signals that give us a little bit more of an understanding of not just what they're consuming, but what it's about, and what it really tells us about what they're interested in. And then we also need to marry that with moving away from too much of a reliance on the MQL or the MQ marketing qualified account even, and triangulating around who are the active known and unknown users in that account that are demonstrating some kind of real intent through first party and third party signals. What do you think?
You bring up great points there, Christine, and just thinking about the importance of content. We were talking about this before we jumped on live here about content's always important. But it almost seems like there's been three segments of the market, or three segments of time here. There's been the pre-COVID segment of content. Well, at least in my mind, there's pre-segment, kind of go-to-market strategy of pre-COVID. Then there's the COVID. And now it seems like we're in this new economic climate, or a bumpier economic climate. How have you seen the content trends changing either lately or recently? What are you seeing there in terms of trends?
I mean, I don't think the need has really changed in terms of what's going on. I think, well, there's definitely economic uncertainty, right? And everybody's feeling the unpredictability factor right now. So whether it's self-fulfilling prophecy, or we really are going into a recession, or we're just being cautious because we think that's what's going to happen, the fact is a lot of companies are looking at leaner budgets, leaner teams, needing to do more with less, sales cycles slowing. And so all of that we need to take into consideration from a content perspective as well. What can we reuse and repurpose? What can we understand about what content is performing and what isn't performing well? So we're focusing on creating the right things and not getting into reactive or shiny object syndrome mode. I mean, I'm going to sound like a broken record to someone like you, Megan, but like content audit, inventory, gap analysis, sounds like fundamentals, right? But we always need to come back to the fundamentals. We really need to understand, what do we have to support our target audiences, target segments across a buyer journey. That doesn't mean the buyer journey is linear, because we know it's not. And we know it's very much becoming more and more self-service. But how do we create an environment and an experience where there's less, we've removed as much of the friction as we can in that self-service with our content, and made that content as discoverable as possible, so it's not a scavenger hunt for buyers when they're looking for the information that they need to make decisions. I also think the focus on more proof point content that really demonstrates that you are going to be able to deliver value with your offering, and can demonstrate that and take a little fear out of the purchasing process, and better enable your champion within an organization to go get that buy-in and say, we still need to spend this money right now, and here's why it's actually going to help us through this next bit of time we're going to go through, and here's why. I think those are all important things to focus on right now.
I think that makes good sense, right? It's always smart to know what you have, what you don't have, and then connect it back to what your buyers and your customers need from you. Wondering though, you mentioned a couple of interesting things. I'd say one was around, sort of proof point related content. What other trends or changes are you seeing in terms of how companies are thinking about content, or even what customers are looking for more? Any in addition to sort of the proof points, anything else you're seeing?
I don't know if looking for more in terms of like, do you mean like format types or topics or things like that? I think that varies based on who your audience is and what they care about. But what I would say is there is a focus on, one, better enabling self-service journeys, two, thinking about the buying group versus just an individual buyer, not lead contact, but buying committee within an account, and making sure we know who that is. Tracking not just known, but also unknown content engagement activity, and converting that over historically over time, once they, raise their hand and let you know who they are. I would also say, and we've been talking about this for years, Megan, the increasing expectation around personalization of experiences, and how can we enable that through, whether that's when we're activating content on our website or through different channels, rules-based or AI-driven personalization, and how do we actually continue to make that better and better over time. The other thing I would say is an improvement of just collection of data and getting a better handle on content performance metrics. So a lot of organizations are still really immature in this area. Before I left Forrester, we had just done a new state of B2B content study for 2020, early, beginning of the year. We wrapped it up, and 47% of B2B marketers who took that survey said they still consider themselves beginners at content measurement, at content performance measurement. That's like almost half of marketers. So there's still a lot of work to be done there. And 29%, I believe it was, said they still have no content attribution model at all. So there's a focus on how do we get better with our data. I think that's just sort of a universal theme across any aspects of B2B right now. Let's get better with our data. And I think it always has been. But, particularly when you start thinking about the challenges we're going to be having, like with GDPR. And I know that Google came out and said they're pushing off the cookieless world scenario, cookie deprecation, to the end of 2024. Who knows when it will happen, but we still as organizations need to be preparing now for how do we get better at capturing first party signals and understanding what they mean and how to take action on them. The other thing I've seen is the theme of sales and marketing alignment, right? So, at Serious Decisions, we were always talking about commercial success depends on the revenue engine alignment across sales, marketing, and product. Still very much believe that and have a passionate opinion around that. But that needs to happen from a data perspective too. So how do we understand from a content perspective how content is being activated by marketing, how it's being activated by sales? A lot of times that's the exact same content. And then understanding what that content engagement data is saying about what's going on in those target accounts and in those target buying groups. So connecting that data is another theme.
It's funny we mentioned the Google announcement about the cookie day. It's like their annual announcement now of, hey, we're going to push it out for another year. We've done it like 2 years in a row. It's crazy. You bring up a lot of interesting points there, and personalization being one of those. And I feel like like you said, we've been talking about that as an industry for quite some time, and it's challenging because the three of us are marketers and we're in marketing all the time. What companies are doing personalization well outside of the MarTech companies? Like what enterprises, where are you seeing a great application of personalization? The reason I ask that question is it seems to me like it's really challenging to get super personalized content. Usually I either see a hodgepodge of content or it's bifurcated of here's the executive content and here's the kind of the buyer content, almost a bifurcation of those two tracks. But getting really granular, I just find that a lot of organizations struggle with that. But who's doing it well, and any advice as to how to get better at that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's very self-serving for me to say this, but I would say Path Factory customers are doing it well because we're helping them do it. But customers like Blackboard, for example, that we highlighted at the Summit conference and the Future of B2B Content keynote that I did with Phyllis Davidson was a good example. Really, I think it's two things. So one is in the planning process. So if you think about the content lifecycle, and it's like planning, production, promotion, or activation of the content, and then performance management to catch all the analytics and have that feed all of the above and help it run better. There is, like you said, John, that upfront planning process, and what you were saying, Megan, at the beginning of this session, which was, do we understand our go-to-market strategy? Is it aligned across sales, marketing, product? Do we understand who our target audiences and accounts are? And then do we actually understand at the persona level or the ideal customer profile level what these people care about, what challenges they're trying to solve? So all of that stuff that's going to help us have some assumptions around what we need to create or go find from a content perspective and create experiences around that content and make it discoverable, et cetera. But then there's also the technology component of when we activate that content, are we actually doing it in a way where, yes, there's the personalization aspects of if so-and-so comes in and we know that they're from this account because of IP address, et cetera, that the logo is going to change and the name and the headline is going to change, et cetera. Same thing with emails. It's going to, personalize what their name is on the email, blah, blah, blah. There's that level of rules-based personalization. But then there's also, whether it's one-to-one, one-to-many, one-to-few, or one-to-many, basically using content engagement data and understanding previous interaction behaviors, particularly around topics of interest. So what topics are they really focused on and consuming? There's usually trends around that. How do we personalize around those behaviors versus thinking, I need to make sure this is the next asset that they consume. You say, here's the logic. They've come in. We know this about who they are. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but whatever we do know, this is what we know. This is what they're currently consuming and what it's about. And here are the other highest performing assets on that topic that have performed well with other like personas and accounts. Let's serve those up as next best recommended content to consume. Or also, like what we do in Path Factory, we say, let them basically self-serve and give them sort of an experience with multiple assets and let them binge, let them decide where they want to go, what they want to consume, instead of let the buyer control their buyer journey. Essentially, give them things that seem contextual based on what their actions are in the moment. But that's pretty much as far as we can take it, right? And then from there, react to their behaviors, whether it's manually or, driven by AI.
I kind of want to go back to the measurement piece. It's top of mind for me right now. I was just meeting with a group of CMOs yesterday and we were talking about measurement, and it's a bit, I think people are kind of all over the board to your point, but a lot of them, when it comes to content, are not confident, to say the least. And to get to the world you just described, you actually need a pretty good command of your content consumption, or you need to be making really good sort of, gut level observations about what people respond to most, or sort of, do that the old fashioned way with just pure volume. But what would you say if you've got a, company that's in that 47% and they're saying, I'm just not doing this at all or well, how would you advise them to get started? Like, what's the path to knowing your content and how it performs?
So again, I'm going to come back to the content audit and inventory, because part of that process is saying, maybe I'm not going back to, if I'm a large enterprise, I'm not going to go probably audit and inventory and catalog and go find the historical metrics on 10,000 assets or something like that. But maybe you say, I'm going to look at everything we've done in the last year or for a specific offering or whatever's top of mind in terms of what's driving future go-to-market, and really looking at that and saying, what do we have? What's the asset type diversity for the content that we've created? What verticals does it support? What audiences, et cetera? What language is it in? What offerings, et cetera? And then also going and actually looking at performance metrics. So part of the inventorying process isn't just what content do we have and creating a catalog of that, but really looking at page views, visits, repeat versus unique visitors, bounce rates, pages per session, conversions, if it's conversion related content, how much of your content is ungated versus gated, where we really need to be moving away from gated content and relying on technology to be doing that work for us. So basically looking at what you currently have and how it's performed. And generally I see a rule of 80-20, like let's say it's web content, 20% of your web page content is probably driving 80% of the traffic. What is that? How can we do more of that stuff? Because that's what's actually working. How can we optimize that content to drive further action from those pages? How can we optimize that content to perform even better in organic search? How can we sequence and link that content to be more tightly joined together so people can find it more easily? So to me, it's starting with, what do we have? How is it currently performing? So we stop focusing on the wrong things. And then two, really getting agreement around KPIs. So to me, this is really laddering up to CMO level priorities, right? Like, what are we trying to measure? What are the initiatives that we're focused on? And then as you move and trickle down to the content, what are the KPIs that when we start rolling those up are going to demonstrate impact in those areas? And, some of it will be, it's not going to be impact right away if you don't have the right technology and attribution model, but you can certainly understand this is the content that is moving. This is the content that's been consumed by active opportunities. This is the content that's been most used by sales to progress opportunities through the pipeline. That's the other thing I think is important too, is not just looking at volume metrics, but understanding the purpose of a piece of content and measuring it based on its purpose. So if there's an awareness piece of content, the metrics that you use to measure that are completely different than a demand gen asset, right? It's not supposed to do the same thing. An early buyer journey asset is not supposed to do the same thing as mid-funnel or bottom of funnel. And there's also fewer people mid-funnel or bottom of funnel. So to measure the success of a mid-funnel asset based on volume of consumption is sort of a false logic to begin with. So I'm kind of rambling, but I would say understand what's performing now so you can focus more on doing that. Get clear and make sure everybody understands what they are supposed to be measuring. And then also make sure you understand the purpose of the content before you weight its value to what it's doing for the business.
I feel like somewhere Ross Graber, our former colleague, is smiling because you're talking about measuring against what the activities meant to deliver, or the assets meant to deliver, versus just judging it in volume. So I think, yes, he's brainwashed all of us, but that's a good thing because he knows what
He certainly has.
Anyhow, but no, it's all good. So I know this seems like a really old argument, but you brought up kind of the gated versus ungated. And I think everybody in principle sort of like understands why ungated is the better way to go. But I feel like old habits die hard. How do you wean people off of gated content, and how, what kinds of technologies help them make the shift so that they don't feel like, oh my gosh, if I ungate this, I'm never going to know who uses my content and I'm not going to have any leads. How do we get them past that fear to the information wants to be free and you will get more, abundance mindset? I'd love your thoughts on that one, an oldie but goodie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it means there's not a place for gated ever, like you never throw up a form ever in an experience. I think at some point you do have to do that. I just think that especially earlier stage, there is now technology available, again, like PathX, but also, the revenue intelligence vendors that help you capture anonymous data like the 6 Senses of the world and whatnot, combined with what we do, basically help you capture unknown activity until it becomes known. So you can just collect the unknown data and interaction behaviors without slapping up a form at all. And then at some point you can put up a form. Maybe someone's consuming an asset and you set a time delay and you say, I'm going to let them consume at least the first 2 pages of this asset before I throw up a form. So they get some level of value. And they can decide whether they want to finish reading the rest of the ebook or whatever it is, or maybe it's first page, whatever. It's interesting. Way back when, early in my career, we used to actually do this manually, where we would set up what we used to call registration walls, where we would say, "Oh, I'm going to build a tutorial for this IT guy, and we're going to wait until they get to." We would do it more by like word count. So it would be like, once they've scrolled to this depth or they've reached this page or whatever, we'll throw up a form to try to drive a subscription. So, but there's better technology now that will let you do that and bring up forms later, and also be able to capture all the unknown activity until it becomes known. So you don't feel like you have to capture it so early in the experience and sort of turn people off. It's like, wait, this is the first time I've engaged with you, and you want me to give you all this information about me? Like, no. And they leave. So I would definitely be recommending that people explore alternatives like that, because at this point, the classic send out an email, send them to a landing page with a form, ask them to download has become a little bit old school.
You bring up a lot of really interesting things about the measurement side of content, and maybe taking a step back. And, probably my last question as we're heading toward the bottom of the hour here. Are there any techniques or ideas to get the most relevant content to get that engagement high? So you said you're measuring that high engagement. For example, hiring a subject matter expert, or how do you know, like, what steps do you take to really get really, really relevant or hyper relevant content for that reader?
I mean, it comes back to knowing your audience, right? And really what they care about, and that how that relates back to what you do as a business. So I think that sort of the classic formulas still remain in terms of earlier in the buyer journey. People care about industry trends and educating themselves about what's going on in the market and what people like them are dealing with and how they're approaching solving those challenges. Previous, that's like the education or discover stage of the buyer journey, right? Then they move into, how do I solve for this problem? And it's the how-to content. And then they're looking to validate and explore vendors and who's the right vendor, et cetera. So I don't think that that approach really changes all that much. I do think we're still, targeted, multi-channel, finding people where they are. I don't think any of sort of the general integrated marketing approaches that we're doing from that perspective and the content that support that really changes. I think we just have to get better at understanding when people interact with that content, what does that mean about what they need next, and using technology in smarter ways and our data in smarter ways to drive next best actions for them, not just because it helps us move them closer to being an opportunity and a customer, but because it helps remove the friction from them from an experience perspective to get to what they need faster. Your idea of at the topic level, it still has to, you still have to have a distinctive point of view in the market. Messaging still matters. Value still matters. I've always loved the Zig Ziglar quote when content marketing became really big of stop selling, start helping. And I still, think value is what we're trying to deliver. We're trying to help people. And I do think we need to do that in entertaining and creative ways and not get too stuck in our formulas too, like play with new formats like this, right? Or, not always say, this has always got to be the bill of materials. This is always the way that we need to talk about this thing. Really explore how to build compelling messaging and compelling format types that are going to keep people interested, because there is a lot of content from a lot of players out there. And how are you going to stand out in that sort of cacophony of content that's out in the world? Is that kind of where you were going, John, with that question?
Exactly where I was going. Yes.
Okay.
It was perfect. Yeah.
And I love your point, Christine, about leaving room for experimentation. I think that's, you can have sort of a playbook and run that, whatever, 75% of the time or 80% of the time, but leave that, remaining 25% for testing things and trying and making sure that you've accurately assessed what your audience prefers, especially if you're not using a lot of, sort of customer data to make those choices. I feel like experimentation becomes that much more critical to make sure you're not leaving, anything on the table that would make for a better experience for your customer. So thank you for that very good advice and all of your good advice today.
One last comment on that.
Please.
The other thing I would say is competitive content intelligence is important as well. Understanding what your competitors are doing from a messaging and content perspective and having that inform your own content strategy. It's not the only input, but it's one of many inputs that you should be taking into consideration.
Great point.
Yeah, totally agree. Know what else your audience is seeing. You don't operate in a vacuum. None of us do.
And if you sound exactly the same as all your competitors and you're using the exact same messaging and it's very similar content, you're not standing out.
Yeah, it hurts the whole category too, right? If everybody sounds the same, it's like audiences are looking at that going, what?
Yeah.
Like, which one should I buy? You all sound the same.
You're all the same. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a path to no decision, I would say, is probably what happens there. But anyhow, Christine, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate you taking time. Super excited for your new role, and can't wait to see more from Path Factory's clients, because I know they really do excellent work. We had plenty of them win awards at Serious Decisions for sure, and 4-star as well. John, any parting words for our guests today and for our audience and everyone
Christine,
for joining?
thank you. I'll just echo what Megan said. Thank you for joining us today. And I think next week we have, Megan, do we have Tara from Demandbase joining us?
I believe we do. We have Tara Quell, who is their lead on financial services marketing. And that's